You are looking at a painting by Salvador Dali. It is called The Vision of Hell. Only a handful of people have seen it. It is a religious painting, one that this master of surrealism was hired to create. Dali was an exhibitionist. His work and himself were always on display. Yet this painting was a secret. No one saw him paint it. It was never cataloged, and he never talked about it. Yet it changed the direction of his work and his life. This painting is Dali's greatest secret. Salvador Dali was never one to hide his light under a bushel. Perhaps the greatest artistic genius of the 20th century, some feel he was even on par with the great Leonardo da Vinci. And like all great artists, he agreed to do commercial work. Paintings done on commission from organizations or individuals who wanted the master's touch. And that's why author Paul Perry begins his book research at the Fatima Shrine in Fatima, Portugal. It is visions that took place here that led Dali to paint the vision of hell. Not just any vision of hell, the vision of hell. The vision of hell was seen here at Fatima on July 13, 1917, by 3 shepherd children innocently caring for their sheep. It was a horrific vision, so horrific that the children were petrified at the mere thought of what they had seen. Word of the vision leaked out, and Fatima became a pilgrimage site of a magnitude that continues to today. The children had a total of 6 apparitions and 3 visions, but it was the vision of hell that seared these visions into the minds of the believers. It was the beginning of the hippie era, and a young priest in training convinced the movement's leader, John Haffert, that he could reach young people with a bold artistic statement, and recommended Salvador Dali, which is why Haffert reached out to Dali with an offer to paint a petrifying glimpse of hell. It should have been an easy transaction, just a work-for-hire commission for the master of the surreal. But it turned into something much more. It turned into Dali's greatest secret. It was 1959, and John Haffert had a question for God. How can I get more young people to join the organization? The organization was the Blue Army, also known as the World Apostolate of Fatima. On the last day of the year, he got his answer. A letter from a Catholic seminarian gave him the perfect answer. Have surrealist painter Salvador Dali paint the vision of hell, one of the mystical visions seen by the 3 children. The seminarian was a young man we will call Matthew, because even after all these years, he is asked to remain anonymous. Matthew told Haffert of his life as a merchant seaman and his conversion to Catholicism after seeing The Miracle of Fatima at a dilapidated theater in Monrovia, Liberia, on the West African coast.
Courage, faith, understanding. These were their only weapons, and they were forged in the simple hearts of 3 children who found in this quiet meadow in Fatima, Portugal, something so wonderful, so inspiring, so powerful, that it made men with guns tremble before children with truth.
Matthew said that he had wept through much of the film. I could not explain this response, he wrote to Hafford. I only knew that I had discovered something wonderfully strange and mysterious, and yet very real. I wanted to know even more about this miracle. The miracle was the apparitions and visions the three children had in 1917. But the one that affected him most profoundly was the first vision, the vision of hell.
The sun! Look at the sun, it's falling!
The apparitions of Fatima made Matthew a believer. There was no longer a question in his mind about hell. It truly existed. The movie drove Matthew to the priesthood. It also obsessed him with the notion of a living, breathing hell. He wanted to save souls from eternal damnation, he wrote to Hafford. And there was only one way to do that, he declared. Have Salvador Dali paint it. Dali, a religious painting. The vision of hell. Why not? He had done religious paintings before. The idea was perfect. Or so thought Hafford. It was John Hafford's marketing talents that led Pope Pius XII to call him the greatest man in the world. It was he, unlike anyone else, said the Pope, who had managed to bring the message of Fatima to the four corners of the world. Most everything one sees at Fatima, the churches, the devotion, the hotels, and the pilgrims, was somehow touched by the determined John Hafford, which is why he was known to many as Mr. Fatima. Hafford founded the World Apostolate of Fatima, also known as the Blue Army. At one time, it had more than 80 million members worldwide.
John Hafford was really the man who was the instrument that caused this organization to expand from a small seed and mushroom to this organization that is in over 100 nations now. Salvador Dali was so unique in his mind, his thought process, his life, which was all expressed in his art form. You know, as the father of surrealism, this was a new art form, and it was an art form that was not representing the real world in a way that any other artist had done. And I think he understood that hell is not something we could represent the way a typical artist would represent it. And Salvador Dali, with his unique mind, his unique style, was the best choice to represent this world that was immaterial, yet extremely powerful, as Salvador Dali's paintings were.
Hafford saw a painting by Dali as something shocking and provocative, a way to attract a lot of attention, especially from young people. And it was obvious that Matthew saw it the same way.
Our goal is to create a hell consciousness. To accomplish this, we need Salvador Dali as the painter. Because a picture, any picture by Dali, is news. It attracts attention. I think that the publishers of Life magazine would publish a print of such a painting and thus carry it to some 12 or 14 million people.
12 to 14 million viewers of the painting. Matthew was proposing more than a painting. He was proposing a Blue Army recruitment poster. The date was May 13th, 1917. And three children, Lucia dos Santos and cousins Jacinta and Francisco Marto, were driving their family sheep to a grazing area near the town of Fatima. Suddenly, a bright flash from the sky brought them to attention. Then, a second flash took place, and with it came the apparition of a lady brighter than the sun, floating above the holm oak trees. The lady introduced herself as being from heaven. and asked the children if they were prepared to accept all of the suffering that God was about to heap on them for the conversion of sinners. The lady told the children to return to this place on the 13th of every month for the next 5 months, at which point she would tell them who she was and what she wanted. She promised a sign that everyone could see, one that validated the apparitions. And then the lady rose and flew eastward on a path of light. Word of the apparition spread, and soon everyone in town was frightened by the attention it was attracting. The communists were trying to erase religion from Portugal and didn't need apparitions from the Virgin Mary. The Freemasons, a powerful political party, saw this as a Catholic plot to restore the monarchy. Even the Catholic Church was concerned. In these troubled times, they were trying to play it safe and keep a low profile. And then there was Lucia's angry mother and doubtful family. Father Andrew Apostoli tells the family's story.
Her family did not believe her. The mother thought she was making the whole story up. And so she was very angry with Lucia. Her sisters were angry at her. Some of the neighbors made fun of her. She suffered a great deal. Yes, the mother was abusive. They say that she even slapped her daughter, and she kind of got a bit hysterical at times. And then to top that off, the mother was afraid that if they're making up this story, the people are going to be furious at them, you know, for arousing everybody's interest in a vision of the Blessed Mother. So she was, I understand, somewhat severe with Lucia, and she almost to the end did not believe, almost till the miracle of the Son.
Despite the fear and loathing that was heaped on the children, the trio returned to the Cova on June 13, 1917, as they promised the lady they would. And when they arrived, 50 faithful Catholics from town were awaiting them. The lady revealed to Lucia that the other 2 children, Jacinta and Francisco, would die soon. Lucia, she said, would be left on earth to make the messages known. And that was it for the lady's second appearance. As Lucia said, she had gone back to heaven and the door had closed. The children returned to the Cove on July 13th, and surrounded by 3,000 spectators, they were treated to the first of the 3 secrets that would be revealed to them by the Virgin: the vision of hell.
A ray of light seemed to come from the lady's hand and penetrate the earth, and we saw a great sea of fire. In that fire were souls, like black embers floating in the wind. There were great clouds of smoke and showering sparks everywhere, with shrieks and groans of sorrow and despair that horrified us and made us tremble with fear. The devils looked like strange animals, terrible and disgusting, with the transparency of glowing coals. Frightened and begging for help, we raised our eyes to the lady, who said to us, with sadness but also great kindness, "You saw hell, where the poor sinners go. To save the world, God wants the world to turn to me. If they do what I tell you, many souls will be saved, and there will be peace."
John Haffert read the letter from Matthew the seminarian, and then he read it again. The words of Matthew told him that this young seminarian was a kindred spirit, a man studying to be a priest who had big and unique ideas of his own and wasn't afraid to manifest them. As Haffert wrote his reply to Matthew, he began to wonder, would Sister Lucia, now a cloistered nun, talk to Salvador Dali? Or, for that matter, would Salvador Dali even be interested in talking to her? Didn't the great Dali hate religion? Dali liked a good challenge too. In these photos from a never-completed film, we see Dali challenging an unbeatable foe at the Paris Suit, and then applying his newfound knowledge of rhino horns to paint a copy of The Lace Maker by Dutch painter Vermeer. As a young man, Dali studied the new psychology of Sigmund Freud and learned to explore his dreams for images. The dreamscapes he puts on canvas made him the most famous surrealist in the world, especially the painting known as Persistence of Memory, The Melting Clocks.
The persistence of memory puts Salvador Dali at the very top of the surrealistic game, where other artists of his time, like Picasso, painted about the interaction between men and women. Salvador Dali's paintings looked at the interaction in the human mind. His paintings helped people interrogate their own subconscious.
Dali's work provided a visual explanation of surrealism that a written manifestos could not attain. But still, Dali was drummed out by the Surrealist movement in 1934 by its founder, André Breton. He felt that Dali's work was too thought out, and therefore too commercial to be truly surreal. That was fine with Dali. He went solo and created his own school of art, the Paranoid Critical Method. The Paranoid Critical Method was like guided surrealism. Rather than wait for inspiration, Dali would make it by combining things that had no rational link to one another. A rock in a human head, for example. Or a rhino horn. You get the picture. Dali was trying to systemize irrational thought in the same way a person with paranoia does. Dali was perfectly suited for the task. The art world loved his new philosophy, and over the next 2 decades, Dali grew to become the most famous, flamboyant, and wealthiest artist in the world. He had mastery over his universe. He was loved by celebrities and was a celebrity himself. Yet as he aged, he found himself slipping slowly into a spiritual crisis. But soon, world events took place that shook Dali's spiritual life.
The explosion of the atom bomb on 6 August 1945 sent a seismic shock through me. Mysticism. That is to say, the profound intuitive knowledge of what is, direct communications with the all, absolute vision by the grace of truth, by the grace of God. It was the power of the atom bomb, a greater understanding of science, a deeper need for spirituality, that drew Dali to create another school of painting, a form of religion that combined God, science, and mysticism. He called this new school nuclear mysticism. It seems to me that he wanted to believe in mysticism, but not religion.
That's exactly it, yeah, absolutely. He was mystical, but religious to him seemed something for the people.
This is Amanda Lear, writer, musician, artist, and Dali's close friend for nearly 2 decades. She remembers much of Dali's mystical views during this period.
You spent a lot of private time with Dali, and I'm curious to know if he ever talked to you about immortality, heaven and hell.
About immortality, yes, quite a lot. He was desperate to become immortal. Strangely enough, in those days, 40 years or so ago, they had discovered cryogenic, that you can be frozen when you die. And he said, I'm going to be frozen. I want to sign the agreement that as soon as I die, they'll freeze me. I think they did that to Walt Disney. And then they'll wake me up in 100 years and, I'll be reanimated. So he wanted to live forever. He believed probably in a God, but not the way we see it, not the iconic God that we see in churches. I think it was very strange because one day we spoke about the Stanley Kubrick movie, 2001, Space Odyssey. He liked very much Stanley Kubrick. And He said to me, you see, the way Stanley Kubrick imagined God was this black monolith, that's that piece of black thing. And he said, God in fact is like this. I think God is about that big. This is, you can measure God. I say, you can't. He said, yeah, sure. God is about that big, that long, and it's a concentrate of some kind of cosmic energy or some kind of spirit there. It exists, but it is not an old man with a white beard. It's definitely some spirit who up there direct everything. That's the way he saw God. Of course, it's a different vision, yeah.
The nuclear mystical period combined Dali's passion for science and mysticism, which he referred to as being religious and hallucinogenic. But as much as he loved the work that came from this period, the critics despised it.
They seem to me to be blatant expressions of morbid eroticism, in which the artist had abused the right of sanctuary to the point of sacrilege. Complete rubbish! And the purest kitsch.
Most stinging of all came from Dali's old friend, André Breton, who intimated that Dali had become nothing but a hack for the Pope. The effect of all this harsh criticism on Dali? There was no effect. Like the saints of old, Dali had been blinded by the light of spiritual revelation. In fact, Dali loved his strange mix of science, religion, and mysticism, and as a result, his work became far more religious, and unabashedly so. What was going on in Dali's mind? This is Nicolas Descharnes, who along with his father Robert makes the team of Descharnes and Descharnes, the most renowned of Dali experts. Robert was Dali's photographer and confidant for almost 40 years. He was appointed by Dali himself as the lifetime trustee and delegate of foreign affairs for the Salvador Dali Foundation. They maintain their important Dali archive in the secret limestone cave in the Loire Valley of France. Paul went to their archive to discuss the painting, and most specifically to ask Nicolas one burning question. Did Dali have a religious conversion?
In 1959, he was 55, and he had lived the loss of his mother, then his father, and then my feeling is that he had a conversion. I really believe that he did this conversion. Now the question is why he did it so late. Maybe it's because he didn't have the opportunity. And the opportunity was reading the message of Fatima and working on the subject.
And do you think he concealed it because it wasn't good for his career? Think he concealed his conversion because it was bad for marketing?
Yeah, that could be. That could be. Because he had to stay with his text and his declaration that he had before, saying that a religion is a spiritual architecture. But also he said that in his opinion, the Catholic religion is the best architecture, spiritual architecture.
He must have believed that. In 1958, Dali and Gala had an audience with the Pope, who granted them a church wedding after the death of her first husband, the poet Paul Eluard. And soon this fallen Catholic declared himself reborn and promised to modernize the ancient icons of the faith. Little did Dali know that he was about to get a chance to provide that link to the metaphysical, and do it for an apostolate of the Catholic Church. The letter that introduced Salvador Dali to the vision of hell was delivered to him in the lobby at the St. Regis Hotel in New York City. It was from Matthew the seminarian and quoted large portions of Sister Lucia's memoir. What Dali read must have flipped his mystical switches. He realized that his canvas had been chosen to be the window between heaven, earth, and hell. One thing was sure. Dali wanted to meet Mr. Fatima himself. John Haffert. To discuss what happened next, Dali expert Nicolas Descharnes was brought to the Castle of Orem in Portugal to meet with Carlos Evaristo, Haffert's friend and successor in the Oriana Historical Foundation.
This is the heart of the Castle of Orem.
Very medieval. That
Yeah.
fit the character of Dali, absolutely.
Absolutely. It's very surrealist.
Evaristo proved to be a wealth of information about the Dali painting and his mysterious meeting over lunch at the St. Regis Hotel in New York with John Haffert. It was a meeting that would change Dali's life.
And it's interesting that what Salvador Dali ordered was escargot. And picking up the escargot fork, he explained to Haffert his concept of what he was going to do for the painting. He said, "Mr. Haffert, many of the ancient painters, Dante and other people, used devils with pitchforks, prying at the souls in hell. We will use escargot forks." And he explained why. He took a snail and he said, "The man who is a sinner cowers in shame and curls up in the shell like the snail. And so the sinner's soul can only be retracted with escargot forks, snail forks." John had asked Salvador Dali how much the painting would cost. Dali had this cane, and Haffert said, he twisted his mustache and he raised the cane and he said, "Senor Haffert, the size of my cane, $25,000. And then he lowered the cane and he said, "Half the size of the cane, $15,000. And he sent him the check with this letter. And in the check, with the check, he wrote, and I'm going to quote now, he said, "Herewith is included the $15,000 for the painting, The Vision of Hell, which I would appreciate you make the size of your cane." And he said he was a good chap. He did it.
It was now 1959, and a secret was coming. The third secret of Fatima. The first secret was the horrific vision of hell. The second, another world war and the rise of communism. And then there was the third secret, one so prophetic that the Vatican kept it locked in a box in the office of the Pope. But now the Vatican promised that they would release the long-awaited third secret in 1960, and Haffert wanted to be ready. The revelation would be used by this marketing genius as a way of selling Fatima to the world. To do this, he started an interview show for Catholic television called Countdown 1960, in which he hosted interviews with Catholic leaders, including future President John F. Kennedy, a militant member of the Blue Army.
But it's because our concept of government fits the basic nature of man, and man desires to be independent. And therefore, in my opinion, ultimately, he is not going to accept the Soviet system, which denies the existence of God, which most people believe in around the world, as well as in the United States, and which seeks to put an overlord over him from abroad. Now that, in my opinion, is the Achilles heel of, as it has been of Napoleon and every other leader in history, who seeks to expand his power beyond his national boundary.
John Haffert was a man of tremendous talent and huge ideas that just kept ballooning one after the other after the other. It was as if he had a vision, and then he would attempt to accomplish that vision, and that vision would just expand and expand into one greater and greater vision, and it just kept going and going. So most of us, have a vision, and we spend so much time trying to achieve it. He achieved his vision so quickly, and then it just expanded and expanded and expanded, so he was able to achieve so much in a short period of time. The plan John Haffert had for the Salvador Dali painting of the vision of hell was to help people understand not only that hell exists, but to get a truer feeling of what hell would be like.
a national television show, 2 large jets to fly pilgrims to Portugal, a hotel to house them, and now a Salvador Dali painting to illustrate hell. Haffert's campaign for Fatima was in place for the Big Bang of Catholicism, the revelation of the third secret.
Bonjour. Good morning. Is le
Salvador Dali's world was surreal. Everywhere he settled for any period of time, whether home or abroad, was graced with an air of surreality created by the master. His home in Port Legat on Spain's Costa Brava was like living in one of his paintings. So too was his magnificent castle in Pubol, another monument to surreality. Even the hotels where Dali and Gala spent much of the year found themselves a subject for the canvas of his subconscious. To this day, the Hotel Maurice, that 5-star jewel in Paris, contains artistic artifacts from the days of Dali's habitation, including a vision box of mirrors, chairs too heavy to lift, and a magnificent carpet inspired by a litho with the unglamorous name of the donkey carcass.
So one of the real reasons we came to the Hotel Maurice is this. This is a nouveau altar designed by Salvador Dali. So you can come here to the bar, have a drink, and light a candle for your good fortunes. Dali was always looking for new subject matter, vigorous new shoots of creativity, if you will. And wherever he was, he performed the magic that was his art.
Dali was so good that he could paint anywhere, even on stage, which is why what happened next was so strange. Try as he might, Dali could not execute the vision of hell. There was only one solution, he told Haffert. He needed to talk to Sister Lucia. It was 1959, and Sister Lucia was the only Fatima visionary left alive. Since moving to Coimbra, Portugal, she had been forbidden to speak to anyone about the visions. Now at age 42, she was frustrated. The world needed to know about the vision, she told Haffert. But as a cloistered nun, she was forbidden to speak. As Haffert wrote in one of his memoirs,
Lucia felt completely helpless to propagate the message of Fatima. One by one, the prophecies were coming true. The Second World War had come and gone. Russia had become a superpower. The nuclear bomb had been developed, and already the atheists were brandishing it in the face of a terrified world. What Our Lady had warned of in her message was not heeded.
Yet despite Lucia's frustrations, she refused to speak to Dali. It pained her too much to speak of hell, she told Haffert. The account in her memoir was all she could offer the great artist. Dali's response to the news was almost flippant. "There is no problem," said Dali. He would study her words and put together his own vision.
But there was a problem. Something seemed to have a hold on Dali. No matter how much he tried, Salvador Dali, the master of surrealism, the king of self-confidence, could not paint the vision of hell.
He took the problem home with him to Port Legat. It was here, in the comfort and solitude of his home, that Dali did his best work. Yet despite being in his creative center, Dali could not complete the vision of hell. He had destroyed 4 sketches and a painting, and still couldn't get it right, he told Haffert. Oh, yes, there is one other thing. The Vision of Hell was a secret painting. Even his closest friends knew nothing about it. It's as though this painting became a private act of faith, a mission from God. Paul Perry first learned this painting was Dali's secret when he showed it to Robert Descharnes, Dali's photographer and confidant for nearly 40 years. Robert took more than 50,000 photos of Dali. He even helped the master complete his last painting. He is a man who knows most everything about Dali's personal and public life. When Paul showed him the painting, the man who had chronicled Dali's last 40 years just shook his head.
Have you ever seen this painting?
I don't remember. For me, it's a very interesting mystical painting made by Dali. Well, anyway, it's a little commercial for me. It's a little commercial. But Dali, he was an honest painter, and the subject is perfectly well. But I remember now the connection with the Blue Army and the moment when he painted in '62. I remember.
Did he just...
And I'm sure he painted in Porligat.
Okay.
But I have no more information about this canvas.
And then there's Amanda Lear, who has already appeared briefly. Certainly she had seen Dali working on the Vision of Hell.
Okay, so this is a reproduction of the original painting, real size.
Well, this is a vision of Fatima.
Right.
With the Virgin.
Vision of hell.
Of hell?
Yes.
Seeing the painting brought back more memories of Dali and his conflicts about God and religion.
Dali painted a lot of religious scene, and it's very strange that one of his most famous paintings is the Christ, famous Christ, which is in the Museum of Edinburgh, the Saint Jean de la Croix. And he made, I think he painted 3 or 4 crucifixions, plus some Madonna. He was always putting on his wife Gala dressed up as a Madonna. And people imagine that he was always preoccupied with mystical questions, immortality, death, does God exist, and so on. But I think when I was with him, at least, I never saw, he never gave me the image of a man being obsessed with religion. I don't think he was.
Did he ever talk to you about religion?
Yes, but I think it was an attitude. It was very ambiguous, the relationship that Dali had with religion. I never saw him going to church or to assist to a service or pray. I never saw him pray. But on the other hand, his wife, Gala, was very religious. Gala always had in her room a small icon which came from Russia, and it represented the Black Virgin of Kazan, and Gala was very religious. So he obviously couldn't live all these years with a religious wife and not himself believe, you know.
Is there anything Amanda recognized in this painting?
I never saw that painting, never. I think it was painted when? 62. No,
As Amanda Lear left for another appointment, Nicholas and Paul found themselves completely puzzled. How could Dali, a very public man, keep the painting so secret? That's a good question. Why would Dali keep this painting secret? And for that matter, why did the Blue Army keep it secret? Now it was 1960, and Haffert believed the Vatican was zeroing in on a release date for the long-awaited third secret. He expected the public reaction to be explosive. All eyes would be on Fatima, and Haffert wanted to make sure they saw a shocking and provocative Dali painting. Then Haffert received a call from Dali. "I cannot create the horror of hell," he told Haffert. When Haffert heard that Dali had destroyed some early attempts, He insisted that Dali come to Portugal. It was time to meet Sister Lucia.
Salvador Dali arrived in Fatima in 1960. He was picked up at the airport by Canon José Galamba de Oliveira, who was the author of some of the earliest books on Fatima. Canon Galamba de Oliveira was the person that wrote to Sister Lucia, the person that actually on behalf of the bishop had asked Sister Lucia to commit the secret to writing and the whole story. So he was the person that was best informed on the Fatima message because he had written the first authoritative books on Fatima. So he brought Dali to meet Sister Lucia so she could tell the details of the vision of hell in 1960.
Dali asked few questions and was in Sister Lucia's presence for maybe 15 minutes. But it was a meeting that struck Dali deeply, said Evaristo. The painter spoke enthusiastically about breathing the same air as the visionary. He also made a special request of the surprised priest.
He was moved, and he asked Canon Galamba to hear his confession. And Canon Galamba had heard his confession at the Fatima Shrine, in the confessionals of the Fatima Shrine. And of course, the secrecy of confession wouldn't allow Canon Galamba to speak the nature of the confession. But what he said was, and very interesting, that it was the most sincere, the most true confession that he had ever experienced in his many years as a priest. And he was completely moved at Dali's sincerity and
precision, probably, of the description of the his suffering and his
yes, and of his faults and of his his transgressions.
At this point, Dali began to see this as a serious work of spiritual art. Just how serious soon became obvious.
And so he believed that his visit to Fatima and his commission to paint this painting of the vision of hell converted Dali, that it moved Dali from a very secular person to a much more interior, much more religious, meditating person. And he believed this till his last day, Canon Galamba, that it was the person that he believed in all of his career as a priest and involved with Fatima had been most touched by the Fatima message. It was Salvador Dali.
For Dali, the story of Fatima now became a reality. How real? On a walk with Canon Galamba, Dali stopped at the scene of the vision and he said, "Imagine, the earth opened up right here and showed hell." Salvador Dali was now hooked.
Finally, Dali went to Haffert's hilltop residence in the castle of Urem. There, the two masters of their art discussed the symbology important to the painting.
Haffert tuned Dali into Fatima. That if Dali in the beginning was a Catholic and had normal devotion, let's say, to Our Lady, in the end, Haffert tuned him in, fine-tuned him to the specifics of Fatima as John Haffert alone depicted, portrayed, symbolized, propagated.
In addition to all the elements seen by the children during their vision, Haffert recommended adding the castle of Urem. Named for Oriana, the legendary Muslim princess who converted to Christianity, Haffert felt the castle symbolized an eternal message of religious conversion. Dali agreed to use it. Before leaving Fatima, he also gave Canon Galamba an envelope with $15,000 in American Express traveler's checks, the same amount he had been paid for the painting of the Vision of Hell. It appeared to all at Fatima that Dali's visit had led to a conversion, one that took Dali back to Catholicism. But when he left Fatima and returned to Dali land, the conversion still remained Dali's secret. Why he kept it a secret baffled Descharnes.
Well, Dali was a very public man. He used his painting for his marketing, and This painting was done in secret. My father never saw it in the studio, neither Ramon Dali. So why he did it in secret? Why he did it and for who? I don't know yet, but we should inquire.
Nicholas and Paul returned to Aze, France, to speak to Robert Descharnes. As one of the few remaining members of Dali's inner circle, they hoped Robert could shine light on why the vision of hell was done in utmost secrecy.
I don't remember seeing this in the workshop of Dali. It was my duty to capture all of Dali's work I could see, even if it was unfinished. If I had seen the painting in creation, I would have photographed it. But he may have hid this work. He obviously did. There were often journalists in the house, and because of that, I believe he hid the painting so none of them would see.
Being a Dali expert and a family member, Nicholas added his own opinion.
So I believe, and Robert agree on that probably he hid the painting to be sure that nobody will see it. And more of that, one of his best friends, guys that he trusts and with who he have intellectual discussion. So it's not, in my opinion, it's not a simple commissioned artwork. There is something.
So why did Dali keep the painting and his supposed conversion secret? There are a few people around Fatima who think they know.
And I know that Salvador Dali basically did this painting not only secretly as far as John Haffert was concerned, but he didn't reveal this to anybody because this was such a personal painting for Salvador Dali himself.
The painting that he had been commissioned to do, it was only one of 2 or 3 paintings that had ever been commissioned officially by an organization as powerful as the Blue Army, connected to the message of Fatima and the hierarchy of the church and the Pope. And he felt the weight of this commission, as if perhaps he had been commissioned to paint this painting by Our Lady herself. Dali also felt that this commission was so important that it had nothing to do with any of the paintings he had ever done in his life. And so it had to be something personal between him and God. And so I would, my take on it would be that it touched him so profoundly that he kept it to himself.
Being touched so profoundly may have blocked his artistic talents. Dali had promised John Haffert that he would have the painting done before the end of the year. But 1960 was rapidly passing, and Dali had only a vague concept of the painting, and was still unable to complete it. Other artists of the Fatima story had the luxury of having drawings and notes from Sister Lucia. She had even modeled Mary's hand movements for the sculptor Thadim, who went on to achieve painful inspiration by carving part of his work on his knees. Dali would have none of that. For inspiration, he may have cruised the Seine on his annual trip to Paris. There, if past were prologue, he would have taken a voyage through his own subconscious, relying on the dream state, the sleep of truth, to take him to the realm of the surreal world for divine inspiration. From the deck of a riverboat with the city lights passing effortlessly by, it was the perfect place for him to put his mind in neutral and let the images and memories of the Fatima story build in his mind. And finally, in late 1961, the vision of hell was completed. Salvador Dali's painting was now ready to be unveiled to the world. John Haffert was on a treasure hunt in the Caribbean when his office told him that the Dali painting had been completed. It was October of 1961, and Haffert was no longer in a rush for the painting.
On February the 8th of 1960, the A&I news agency released a comment that the Vatican had decided not to disclose the secret at all. Because Fatima was a private revelation, they weren't going to give tremendous emphasis to this third part of the secret. Anyway, that's what was disclosed, and a lot of people were saddened. Some people felt cheated, felt deceived, because they had told their children for a whole generation, you wait until 1960 when the secret of Fatima is going to be revealed. So when 1960 came and it wasn't revealed and the Vatican decided not to reveal it officially, a lot of people had egg on their face. And John was one of them, because he had had the program Countdown 1960, preparing people for this big revelation. And the painting, in that sense, became it wasn't a success. The big showing, the big thing that Haffert had envisioned was totally gone.
Haffert needed a break from the spotlight. He asked Monsignor Colgan to take a check to Dali and receive the painting. Colgan had a weak heart, so weak that it once stopped. Now Colgan must have thought his heart would stop again, as Dali opened the box and revealed his holy horror.
And when the unveiling takes place, it was in a wooden case. And Dali opens it up, and John Haffert takes a picture, and you can see the horrified look almost of Monsignor Harold Colgan as he looks upon this creation for the first time, because it's not his cup of tea in traditional Catholic art. And Dali, of course, in the photograph, has one of his traditional poses where he has his raised eyebrow and his bulging eyes, looking at very insane, I would say, because that was his trademark, you know. But the painting did not go over very well with the Catholic audience, and it wasn't until after the Second Vatican Council that finally the Dali came to be accepted by the majority of the Catholics as one of the great Catholic works of art of the 20th century.
A few weeks after the interviews in Portugal, Carlos and Paul went to the Vatican in Rome, where they visited the Modern Art Museum. They have 3 Dali paintings on display there, but one in particular caught the eye of Carlos.
This work is particularly important because it was made in 1960 and it depicts the Annunciation, but it has Our Lady without a face. It dates precisely from the year when, according to tradition, the third secret of Fatima was going to be revealed by the Pope. And it is in the same year, 1960, that Dali was supposed to have delivered to the Blue Army of Our Lady of Fatima the painting of the miracle of the apparition, the vision of hell at Fatima.
This tiny painting is as intense as the vision of hell, yet it hangs in the Vatican art galleries. How might the Vatican view the vision of hell now? To answer that question, Paul and Carlos spoke with Father Mark Haydu, International Director for Vatican Museum Patrons.
Now, when this finally came out in 1962, the Vatican didn't like it. They didn't like this painting.
I don't think many people liked it. John Haffert didn't even like it.
And as a result, it ended up being,
boxed
this
away.
is a copy, of course, of the painting, but it ended up being put underneath the nun's bed for almost 40 years.
In the Blue Army?
In the Blue Army
yeah.
in New Jersey.
Okay. Certainly our sensitivity to the modern art and to the modern expressions of the spiritual turmoil that has marked our age, we've learned to appreciate it much more. There's it was Paul VI himself who founded the modern contemporary art. Where did he place it but in his own apartments? So I think also that's really our hope for all those artists who communicate that spiritual turmoil, that it be the first step, as it was evidently in Dali's life, towards a rediscovery of hope and love and serenity. As we can see, serenity is exactly what is lacking here, except
in the Blessed Virgin Mary.
Blessed Virgin Mary.
When this painting was unveiled the first time, I think the reaction to it by the Blue Army, by John Hafford and Monsignor Colgan, was one of, boy, they were just taken aback. And it was sort of, you know, just surprise. And I guess that's what it would have to be. I mean, how could you envision, you know, what Salvador Dali would create when he's creating a vision of hell, and especially if it doesn't resemble at all the description that Sister Lucia put out there. But that's what they wanted. They wanted something different than Sister Lucia had described, or they would have hired any painter in the world. You know, any painter could simply take what she had written and reproduce that on canvas. So it was surprise, it was shock, but all of that was good.
At first, Hafford was shocked by what he saw. He wanted a hell that was, well, a little less hellish. Then he started to analyze it. He looked at it for a few days and he realized that this painting was exactly what he wanted.
When you read the account of the vision of hell that Sister Lucia has in her writings, you get a feeling of hell. But not to the same degree, I think, as when you really study this painting. And I don't mean study it academically, but I mean put your mind into it and let it spend some time there. You sort of get, you know, this horrific feeling as you spend your time and let it go into the depths of this painting in a way that you wouldn't in any other way. And he just seemed to have the insight to know that Salvador Dali could touch that element in a way that no other artist could.
With a fresh understanding of the Dali work, Hafford wrote to Matthew, the priest in training who had come up with the idea of the Dali painting to begin with.
Dear Matthew, Dali's handling of the subject is quite unique. And while it was different than I expected, the more I have considered the painting, the more it has appeared to me that it will serve the purpose intended.
The horror portrayed in the painting surprised Matthew, but he shrugged it off.
I was thinking of something for the ordinary people, the masses. But I am convinced that our Blessed Mother wants it this way and has produced what she needed.
Hafford hired a public relations firm in hopes of getting a museum show for Dali's unique work. It didn't happen. He wrote letters to magazine editors trying to get them to publish the story of the painting. Matthew was pushing hard too. He decided to write a dramatic letter to Claire Booth Luce, the congresswoman wife of Henry Luce, owner of both Time and Life magazines. Matthew begged Mrs. Luce to have the editors publish a story about the painting in Life magazine. She never responded. Finally, Hafford reached out to the only audience he could control, the members of the Blue Army. Against the wishes of the local bishop, he ran a photo of the painting on the cover of Soul, the magazine for Blue Army members. Then, John Hafford gave up. For a brief period of time, the vision of hell was hung in the Fatima Travel Agency. But when somebody placed a coffee cup on the painting, John Hafford devised an unorthodox means of protection.
The security of the Dali was one of the concerns of the Blue Army for many years, because how do you protect a multi-million-dollar painting and keep it from being stolen? Well, you pretend it doesn't exist and you hide it under the bed of a religious sister. And that's exactly what was done.
So this is the room where the painting was held for many years, under a bed, for the better part of 30 years in the hands of the sisters who lived in this building, which was a convent at the time. The sisters were almost certainly the most trusted members of this apostolate and of the shrine. And there's always someone at a convent, so it's not a place that's abandoned like a private home during the day. So although to the world this may have seemed like a rather poor choice of a place to store, it's probably very prudent.
So we didn't know exactly what to do with it. And, you know, we do so many things that it just sort of got lost in the shuffle. And by lost in the shuffle, I mean it really got lost. We flat out almost didn't know where it was. And it was basically missing for years.
The Vision of Hell spent more than 30 years underneath this bed, coming out only twice. A nun rediscovered it in 1997. The nearly 30 years since painting The Vision of Hell were the most bizarre yet pious of Dali's life. His fame grew, and it was his inherent strangeness which made him memorable and marketable. But much of it was a show for the cameras, really.
In the years following the painting of Vision of Hell, Salvador Dali did hundreds of sculptures, graphics, and paintings, all dealing with the subject of religion. Here's a few of them right here.
In fact, Dali longed for immortality and salvation, dreamed of it, and for much of his adult life, he searched for the pathway to eternal life. He even produced a book with Robert Descharnes called 10 Recipes for Immortality that spoke of DNA, hibernation, and religion as means to, well, life with no end. The book, by the way, is dedicated to God. At the end of this documentary is a story about Salvador Dali that seems too ironic to be true. Dali experienced his own vision of hell in a fire at Pubol Castle. It was 1984. Gala had died 2 years earlier, and now the great master was bedridden with Parkinson's disease. On August 30th, Dali pressed the call button on his bed to summon his nurse. The button shorted out, and Dali's bed caught fire.
He's very intelligent because he go on the floor, because the only place it's possible to stay and to have air. And I came immediately and I see Dali on the floor.
Robert pulled Dali from the burning room and then photographed the horrible event. On the way to the hospital, Dali said he was ready to die. With serious burns over 18% of his body, Dali insisted that he be taken to his museum in Figueres to be surrounded by his greatest work. But he didn't die. Dali was taken to a hospital for treatment and then lived for 5 more years. It was Parkinson's disease that finally took him on January 23rd, 1989. For the 80th anniversary of Fatima, the Vision of Hell was retrieved from under the nun's bed and brought to Portugal. It was at her convent that Sister Lucia saw the painting for the first time. Her verdict? It was the best representation ever painted of the Vision. The comments by the visionary were a confirmation of the spiritual value of Dali's painting.
It sparked a great interest in many people that had never even come to Fatima, and actually came to Fatima after they read one of the articles I wrote or one of the interviews we gave, and they came to Fatima for the first time, drawn by the painting of the great Salvador Dali, to see what it was all about. So I think that in that essence, the painting has served its purpose, because Lucia had always said, if an instrument is successful in bringing at least one soul back to God, then it has been successful. And I think that even if the painting had not brought anybody else to Fatima or to convert to God, it brought the great Salvador Dali himself.
I mean, obviously, if Sister Lucia said this is one of the best representations, she must have had a concept. She had to have some kind of comparative image in her own mind, which this would correspond to, because again, it didn't seem to correspond exactly to the words she gave in description of the vision of hell.
You also see, this white dot here representing the purity of the Blessed Mother. And you see her hands in sort of an unusual position there that I've never really seen in art before. So that, there's an area where you sort of have to interpret. And you can interpret it however you want.
No, at first you cannot see, but if you look closely, you realize there is a person there. There is a person there. You see the face, the mouth, the breast, the shoulder. So there is a person there being killed, being transperced by those things and bleeding away. Here we have, I suppose, symbol of war. There's a flag there. What is it? The Russian flag? I suppose it's the Russian flag.
And also you see the castle of Urem. Then the representation of Oriana from the legend, and then the hell coming. Usually when you use this system for drawings or etching, he used to accentuate the space by tracing some line of perspective to have an impression of infinity. It's a kind of atmosphere from a dream,
Here is his famous eyebrow, his eye, which is crying, and you can also see in here, there's his eye and the tip of his mustache.
There's also, of course, the soul upside down.
And the soul upside down. And here you see his eye with that very characteristic eyebrow and the tip of his mustache right there, and the smoke that's coming out.
But it's very normal that nobody understand Dali because myself never understand my work. Never Dali understand one painting of Dali because Dali only create enigmas.